Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we're returning to Suzerain, a new text-based choose-your-own-adventure role-playing game that puts you in the shoes of a president in a shaky democracy coming out of dictatorship not that long ago and dealing with a number of crises in sort of a 1950s era. In our last episode, one of our key advisors resigned and began a bid to overthrow us in the upcoming election within our own party, so we were betrayed in our last episode. In this episode, we will be sort of making a trip toward the United Nations, or the game's version of the United Nations, and see how that thing plays out. This will be our second to last episode. I might have said that in our last episode, but this was going to turn out to be kind of a long one. So I did go ahead and split this one into two parts. Hope you guys enjoy, and I'll catch you guys at the end. Alliance of Nations. I, David Visky, and the rest of the Swordish delegation to the Alliance of Nations arrived in Kirut. The local police escorted us to the Alliance headquarters in downtown Constanium, immediately recognizable by its gleaming dome. On entering the building, we were met with a parliamentary guide who briefed us about the procedures. After a strict security screening, the staff ushered us to the third floor. We entered the massive circular assembly hall and took our designated seats. The President of the General Assembly, Mr. Nines, opened the sessions with a short speech and called the first speaker to the floor. It is my great pleasure to invite the Prime Minister of Lesbia to address the Assembly. Patricio Alvarez stood and walked up to the podium. The Assembly applauded. Mr. President, it's my pleasure to return to this podium. Let's see how crazy this year's session will get. When I last spoke here, the message I gave was of encouragement and support to this organization and the vital role it plays. Of all the challenges Eastern Maricopa and the whole world has faced since then, one has grown larger and more imminent than any other. The threat of the so-called socialist states and the actions taken by their authoritarian rulers, with no regard to international law. A loud noise came from the table of Vagsland. I saw Emmerich Hegel pounding his fists on the table in protest. Looks like the Chancellor's already mad. Today, the need to come together as the leaders of the free world is more important than ever. The CSP, under the leadership of United Cantana, has been fueling Vagsland's military-industrial complex and its expansionist aims in eastern Maricopa. The world turned a blind eye when the armies of Vagsland occupied Hedgeland, and they did not stop there. According to our intelligence reports, United Cantana made nuclear missiles were quickly deployed to the island. He pulled out a photograph. Even though it was hard to see from my position, I recognized it as an aerial image of Hedgeland. We demand the Chancellor speak the truth. As you can all see, we have evidence of the construction of silos. You think that's true? Honestly, this was always likely to happen, but so soon after the occupation, I didn't expect that. No Eastern Maricopan nation can accept the installation of weapons of mass destruction in the middle of our Marquian Sea. We hereby call for the immediate dismantling and withdrawal of all missiles and other offensive weapons from Hedgeland.
It's the Cuban Missile Crisis.
We invite all members of the states to support our call for resolution in accordance with Article 11 of the Falcano Treaty. A lot of noises came from the assembly hall in response. Most of the Western Maricopan delegates were clapping, while others either shouted in protest or sat in stony silence. Let us also not forget about the recent events that transpired in another state with socialist teaching, a state that wages war against its own innocent citizens, Valen. That's a bunch of horseshit. Valen isn't even socialist. Strictly speaking, Smolunk's party is called the Vasic Nationalist Party of Neutrist Socialism. The purge of the minorities in this country was again largely ignored by the international community. I would go so far as to call it a genocide. Valen violated our past treaties and mobilized their armed forces, deploying them close to our borders and authorizing them to partake in massacres. Lesbia was affected not only by the large wave of refugees coming from Valen, but also by subsequent government seizures of all of its companies that were active in the country. We hereby call the member states to action against Valen and its rogue government. Thank you. Honestly, that wasn't a bad speech. I think the real chaos will start now. Mr. President, fellow delegates, it is true that the world today faces a multitude of challenges. In the midst of these challenges, the world's most powerful leaders gather here in Kirut. And what do? They make threats, promote hate, and spread lies. Is this the alliance of nations we all want? Where's the cooperation and friendship? Where's the unity? I want to remind you of the wars that the West fought on our soil, of the foreign troops who occupied our country and seized our valuable resources. I want to remind you how they stole the oil from our sacred soil, and they did not know when to stop. The ATO soldiers left, but their interference never ceased. They financed armed rebel groups whose only purpose is to create terror inside our country. So, fellow delegates, don't you dare speak about Valen before you acknowledge your involvement in our civil war, before you acknowledge your own past. That's an empty argument. It doesn't justify what he did. As is well known, after the tremendous tragedy of the Valen Civil War, Arcasia made a deal with United Kantana, where they agreed upon the withdrawal of their troops along with the removal of half of our army. Not only did they weaken us, we were left alone in facing the genocidal Blutish Freedom Front, which the ATO funds together with Rumburg. Just like the delegate before me, I will show you some of the evidence of foreign interference. I have clear evidence of direct aid from Rumburg to the Blutish Freedom Front. They smuggled tons of KA-74s into Valen. They smuggled in their spies, smuggled in mercenary commanders. He's got balls taking on Rumburg in the West like that. These documents will be published everywhere. Copies have already been sent to the investigative affairs of the Alliance of Nations. I expect this organization to do its task and investigate this properly, instead of leaving Valen behind, as they have always done. Coming back to the claims of the Lespasian representative. First, there's no evidence of civilian massacres by the Vezic forces, nor so-called purges of minorities. Second, the operation was limited only to the militant BFF, not the Bloods in general. Third, we know your government is also impacted in the funding of the BFF, and that your oil companies aided their militants during the operation. Fourth, as the state, we only took what was ours. The companies the delegates spoke of were not only aiding militants, they were brought to Valen by force. Scantron Themortal, thank you for the follow. Know that Valen will no longer recognize the right of any other countries to determine what type of weapons we are permitted to possess or what type of policies we will follow within our borders. Valen stands stronger and more united than ever. Our people have spoken. The enemies inside our borders are crushed. Now I ask every delegate here to read our report on the connections of the West with armed militants in eastern Maricopa, and I ask the Alliance of Nations to do what is right. Valen only wants peace. Our people want peace. They are counting on the support and understanding of all the nations of the world. Their proclamation is free Valen or death. The assembly roared with particularly loud applause coming from the seats of Rican nations. He seems to be popular with Rica, doesn't he? Well, he played the victim here pretty strongly, and his anti-imperialist stance has definitely earned him some sympathy from the Ricans. I'm guessing the Ricans are like the non-aligned states? Most of the continent has still not achieved stability after gaining their independence from colonial suzerains. It's easy to forget that it's only been a few years since the revolutions. Victor slowly walked back to a seat and applauded himself. He saluted the Rican delegates as he passed them. Next, President Nines invited Martin van Horten to the podium. He walked up to the microphone with quick steps. This is a lot of frickin' speeches. I need to take a sip of coffee here.
Uh-oh, it's Hejiland time.
This is like the WWF of like international politics, because we got the Cuban Missile Crisis. We got like, I don't know, what is this? Like Iran Contra or something, or some, I don't know. All at the same time? Yeah, Rayne is just like, hey guys, I'm just watching it all.
He looks pissed.
Can you blame him? Vagsland has just occupied Hedgeland. Mr. President, fellow delegates of the Assembly, and friends, it is an honor to be with you today. I wish we could meet under different circumstances. Once again, the CSP nations, and in particular Vagsland, have shown us what they're willing to do to achieve their political aims. I must sadly say that the world has left us alone. We were one of the first countries to propose proper cooperation between Eastern Maricopan nations. Yet, when we were threatened by Vagslandian expansionism, nobody came to our side. Although Mr. Alvarez has voiced his indirect support for us earlier in today's session, I can't keep myself from wondering where he was when our lands were under invasion by the very socialists he spoke about. So here I am, asking for the support of fellow member states of the Alliance of Nations. Agnolia is under attack by Vagsland. A loud banging noise emerged from the table of Vagslandian delegates. All of them were pounding their fists on the table. Those delegates need to learn some respect. Mr. President, please moderate the assembly. This is more than disrespectful. Emmerich Hegel began shouting curses at Nines, repeatedly banging his gavel for order. After a minute of back and forth shouting, the noise settled and the Nines were allowed Martin to continue. As you all know, Hedgeland, which has been a territory of Agnolia for more than 3 decades, was invaded by Vagsland in a sudden attack. Not did they unlawfully occupy our land, they brought nuclear missiles to the island the moment our forces retreated. Malevolentist terror surrounds us on all sides. We must not falter. I invite all member states to find a resolution in accordance with Article 11 of the Falcono Treaty, enforcing the immediate dismantling of all missiles from Hedgeland. I also must remind you that under Article 3 of the Ventry City Treaty, the Alliance of Nations must ensure the withdrawal of the occupying force from the island. I call the democratic world to action against the tyranny of Malinvidism, authoritarianism, militarism, and extremism. The banging noises started again. Hegel stood up and approached the rostrum. You are a spineless jerk, a lackey of Arcasian imperialism. President Nines called for silence and started hitting the gavel. Jesus. What do we do? What do we do? We said we'd keep our distance, right? We said we wouldn't get involved. Do we keep our word or do we get involved? Nuclear missiles cannot be tolerated. But I might start World War III. Look at the old man go. All of your complaints against us are a direct result of your capitalist and neo-colonialist systems. President Nines, please, what is this? I believe I don't need to speak more about this subject. Everything is clear as day. Mr. Hegel's actions speak volumes about the reality of Vagsland and their corrupted ideology. I hope to see the conflict resolved with the help of the Alliance of Nations soon. Thank you. Looks like you're having fun, Mr. President. First of all, I want to extend a due welcome to the new states from Rica that have joined the organization. After fighting for years against colonialism and imperialism, yes, the silver glib tongue of the Eastern communist forces of what amounts to the Soviet Union, right? They more than earned our membership vote. I'm overjoyed to see them finally represented in this assembly. As our numbers grow and more states are represented in this stage, we come ever closer to finding resolutions to conflicts that plague us. For hundreds of years, the dominant economies of Maricopa raised, pillaged, and exploited the continents of Rica and Xenia. Sadly, Vagsland was also part of this plunder. In the years before the revolution, it still clung to the idea of imperialism. But when our masses found their voice, the old colonial powers and their new financiers turned against them. These powers did whatever they could to hamper our revolutions. They did not want the people to be heard. They're scared of us for showing the possibilities of a better path. Of course, they don't want us to succeed. We threaten the productivity that runs on the blood and sweat of their working class. And now they have started labeling us the aggressors. Yet we all know it was the Arcasians who built up military bases around Maricopa. It was the ATO that was first formed to fight against malevolentism. Bullshit. Hedgeland was and is and will be Vagslandian territory. Our intervention in the island was completely justified. Mr. Delegates brought up from the Falcono and Ventry City treaties, however, they're forgetting about the Treaty of Constantium. Vagsland exercised its right to intervene on behalf of our people, who were being oppressed and massacred by the Angolian government just because they did not recognize an appointed governor. They didn't get to elect one. We acted in full accordance with the second article of the treaty. If there's a side to be blamed, it is the state which murders its minorities for publicly showing support to our nation. There was also a claim about illegal missiles. No country in the world has the right to determine what type of weapons we import. If there's a conflict the Alliance can resolve, let's start with the Arcasian base on Falcono Island. Lesbia has been housing Arcasian troops and missiles by our border for years, and none of the member states even talked about it. I also want the member states to look into Arcasian bases in Lesbia. And if the Alliance of Nations truly claims to have the people's best interests at heart, they cannot stay silent about what the Angolian government did in Helgeland, how they took away the rights of our people. Perhaps then there can be a proper dialogue between our nations and the Alliance of Nations, can finally demonstrate that we can serve its intended purpose. But unfortunately, the Alliance of Nations remains all too willing to overlook such human rights violations. However, the Vagslandian government is ready as always to fight the forces of oppression and colonial servitude on behalf of free people everywhere. Was that Sordish? Did I catch that right? He said the revolution will come, yes, but it was in old Valgish. Very similar to Sordish, right? Some words are even written the same way, but I'm surprised you caught that from his accent. Dear God, everybody's going to speak. Now we get to hear Rumberg. They're probably going to talk about how evil we are, right? The Alliance of Nations, the ATO, the CSP, even the OMC has never supported our people when they've been through tragic atrocities. Unlike many of the Western countries here, we never received financial aid when natural disasters struck our land. The pain of our people was never recognized, not even when they faced the threat of genocide at the hand of the Sordish kings. In light of all that, I implore this alliance to take a closer look at the actions of our southern neighbors. They took in traitors and gave them protection. Their president even went so far as to blame our country for spying on his administration through his own private secretary, and he expects the world to believe his lies. I hereby invite all of you to determine... I'm assuming I get to speak after this, right? I hereby invite all of you to determine the initiation of a proper intergovernmental investigation into Sordland. If the Alliance continues to shirk its duties, you can trust Rumberg to take the matters into its own hands. It is also important to point out that Rumberg will not stand idly by if more Contanian and Arcasian militaries are transferred to eastern Maricopa. I hereby condemn both the Oh, wow! All right, you guys, you're really taking up the stance of going against both superpowers, huh? Mr. Smolik, I'm looking forward to reading your report. I wonder what this so-called evidence is all about. Know that your slander does not work on us. Know that we are ready to die for our freedom. Know that our kingdom stands firm and strong. Expect a grand awakening. Grand awakening?
Oh yeah, it's our turn, boys.
Good luck, Mr. President. I walked up to the rostrum and took my place at the podium. In front of me were eyes of the most powerful leaders in the entire world. I looked them in the eye. Please don't hurt us. Please don't hurt us. Please don't hurt us. Go big or go home, THG. Thank you, Mr. President, fellow delegates. Anybody who ascends this rostrum must appreciate what a significant gathering he is addressing. I would like to stress the importance of these words, Alliance of Nations. God damn it, I don't know what to say! Our world is faced with dangers of division, the dangers of large military alliances, and nuclear arms race. That may have been a bad choice, given we're in the alliances now. Today we're confronted by a difficult choice. Our great achievement may either be used for the benefit or to the detriment of mankind. Now I'd like to address some of the topics mentioned here today. It was earlier claimed that Valen was involved in a genocide. We are deeply saddened by the tragic events that took place in Valen. I have to admit that the operation resulted in many unnecessary deaths. I would also like to address the Queen of Rumburg. She talked about some hypothetical threat that our nation poses to Eastern Maricopa, while Rumburg's military has tripled in the last decade. The real threat to Eastern Maricopa has always been Rumburg. Today is still the case. Sordland always wants to have peace between nations, yet we are being threatened by Rumburg. We wanted to be diplomatic, even when Rumburg shot down one of our planes. I have also some evidence to show to the Assembly Mr. Smolik was right about the Ka-74s. We discovered that many militant groups in Sordland were being financed or armed by Rumburg. There's another important piece of evidence that we have provided to us by someone close to the Rumburgian government. Mr. Hailstone was branded as a traitor in Rumburg for blowing the whistle on the country's hidden nuclear facilities. I hereby call on the Alliance of Nations to serve its duty. Rumburg and its nuclear facilities must be properly investigated. The AN can no longer fail to ignore the machinations of the enemies of peace. We stand and always will stand for the rights of people of Sordland and Eastern Maricopa, just as those on other continents. If the right actions are not taken, it will be quite evident that international relations cannot continue on such basis. The AN can no longer fail to ignore the machinations of the enemies of peace. Long live the Alliance of Nations. Long live unity and peace. Lull democracies. Peace in Maricopa, peace in the world. Who's this guy again? Lesbia? Okay. President Alvarez stood up and started applauding. Well spoken. I heard a thunderous applause from half the assembly. Raise your fist. How was it? It was not a bad speech, Mr. President. You did very well. Or you did well. Mr. President, first I want to congratulate you on your election to this high office. Mr. Secretary, delegates of the Alliance of Nations, ladies and gentlemen, fellow friends, we meet again on our quest to bring peace and light into this. So I don't think it was a great speech. I think it was an okay speech. I didn't do a great job. I think the problem is I was sort of trying to toe the line of what interested me, what my previous commitments were in terms of, sort of ignoring the situation in Hedgeland, and also not going totally on the side of the democracies, but also not going against them either. We meet again in our quest to bring peace and light into this world, but even though some of the clouds have lifted, the world has not yet escaped the darkness. The Contanian Security Pact is rapidly expanding its influence. It is very troubling to see a democratic nation in Maricopa be invaded by those malevolent powers. I refer, of course, to Hedgeland's occupation of Vagsland. This is an attack against the lasting peace the world has enjoyed since the century of revolutions. Today, our peacekeeping obligations are being tested by United Cantana and the Malevolous Bloc. If we fail to counter and stop this threat, if we stay idle and allow them to build new walls and weapons of hostility, if the attackers do not face any consequences, then this unstable peace we believed we had built will be the world's downfall, and posterity will point its finger at us for not stopping it. Despite its claims, the CSP actions will only bring about war. We believe that United Cantana and Arcasia together with their allies could come to an understanding for our mutual benefit and our desire to avoid the destruction of the world. Yet Cantana keeps acting in complete disregard to the international law. Their allies are forcefully taking at land and imposing their own values on the peoples of these lands. I will say this to the leaders of United Cantana: if either of us is to be secure, we need a peaceful cooperation, not nuclear missiles, shows of naval superiority, or invasions. If the leaders of United Cantana fail to demilitarize Hedgeland with the complete dismantling of the nuclear missiles and withdraw of the occupying Vagslandian forces, the ATO will have to take matters into its own hand.
What is this supposed to mean? You're promoting war in the Alliance of Nations?
Mr. President, this cannot. Mr. Chancellor, please let me finish. We did not interrupt you when you addressed the Assembly. I must also raise my concerns about the threat that Rumburg poses to eastern Maricopa. The speakers who preceded me clearly showed that tensions are rising. The reports from Valen and Sordland are troubling. The representatives from both countries referred to Ka-74s being smuggled within their borders. Mr. Rayne also pointed out the construction of nuclear weaponry in Rumburg. Our intelligence confirms this. Arcasia and the ATO will stand against the aggression of Rumburg. They are playing a dangerous game, one that may bring ruin to Maricopa and their other lands. I believe the Alliance of Nations can find a resolution to this conflict as well. If not, let it be known that Arcasia will stand together with Sordland. Rumburg cannot do as it pleases. Finally, I propose that the Alliance of Nations undertake the noble cause of helping the people of the world through rewriting and properly enforcing its human rights declaration. The Alliance of Nations cannot survive as a static organization. Its size and duties are increasing enormously. It should adapt to the changing world. But peace and rights do not rest in the hands of this organization alone. They rely on the hearts of our people and the spirit of cooperation between our nations. So let it be known, my fellow inhabitants of this world, let us take our stand and see if we can finally achieve a lasting peace. Thank you. Most of the assembly applauded his speech, the ATO delegates in particular. Honorable Chairman and fellow delegates of the Alliance of Nations, here we are again at the most esteemed meeting of state representatives in the world. Leon. Is he Leon Brezhnev? Leon Trotsky? Or wait, was it Leon? What was Trotsky's first name? I can't even remember. Now I'm like thinking I'm just blanking that it's late. It was Leonid Brezhnev. It was Leon Trotsky. Okay. Historical gamer indeed. Not even sure of what Trotsky's name was, huh? Crap. I just closed. All right. However, increasingly we are being threatened, disregarded, attacked, or ignored in this assembly. The representative of Arcasia has just shown that unfriendly attitude toward us yet again. Arcasia would have you believe that we're standing in the way of lasting peace, yet the peace they talk about was only possible thanks to our missiles and our growing base in the developing world. The ATO kept waging wars against people's revolutions and forcing new independent states to be their puppets, binding them to themselves through the Arcasian lira. And now yet another Arcasian president is telling us that we are the aggressors, that they are the keepers of peace. We will not be silent anymore against these lies. When was this peace you talked about? Where was this cooperation between our countries? Have you ever accepted our invitation to talk about denuclearization? If you don't like us, don't accept our deals, don't listen to our concerns, and keep pointing fingers at us. Why did you invite us to the Alliance of Nations? Every year, United Kantana comes to the Assembly to address the real problems of real people. People who suffer because of your systems, your wars, your ignorance. Whether you like it or not, we'll keep representing the laborers, the slaves, the oppressed of this world. And believe it or not, disregard it, history is on our side. We will say to the representatives of capitalist countries, come and visit us. Come and see the revolution working in Kantana. Show our continent to your people without distorting the reality. If you cannot do that, then you need not come. We believe socialism will triumph over capitalism in the end. Such is the logical conclusion of the development of humankind. This time the lesbian delegates started laughing very loudly. Some other delegates booed. Ridiculous. Malavian or the laughing? Both. You can keep laughing, gentlemen. Communism will bury you. If you really believe in cooperation, we will be waiting. We're not going anywhere. However, if the ATO keeps intervening in our matters, it is natural that the CSP would react. Despite threats from the ATO, Rumburg, or any other nation or organization, we must not succumb to further division and violence. We must ask ourselves, what do the people of our countries expect of us? They surely don't want war and bloodshed. So let us leave to our children and grandchildren good memories of our time and a better future for all. Let them look at history and say, once there were great divisions and complex problems, but leaders of the world came together in the Alliance of Nations and succeeded in settling them in order to ensure peaceful lives. Let us act in such a way to make this session not a session of threats, but a session of hopes and the realization of them. The government of United Kantana and the United Peoples of Kantana are ready to serve their duties for world peace. Long live the People's Revolution. The assembly broke into massive applause? Wow, okay. That was a lot. It definitely was. It was troubling. Tensions are too high. I don't have much personal wealth. All right, so they're modernizing our Air Force. It was kind of already modernized before, wasn't it? Move personal wealth to Kurut. My future in Sordland is in doubt, and it may be right time to diversify my resources by keeping my money reserved safely abroad in the case of unexpected departures. Don't move. I trust my country. My country 'tis of thee. Private meeting with David Vesky. Mr. President, may I come in? Yes, David, please come in. Thank you. First off, thank you for your time. Anything for you, David? I wanted to ask you how you're doing. I'm fine, thanks for asking. It's good. Please be sure to take some time for yourself amid all of this. If you ignore your mental fatigue, it will slowly creep in on you. It will poison your thoughts. Thank you for your valuable advice. Thank you for taking my advice over the years. What a privilege for me. I had the chance to watch my student grow into a fine and strong leader in my lifetime. What a privilege indeed. You have brought reform to Sordland. You're my student actually did it. You don't know how proud I was to be alongside you. It wouldn't be possible without you. You're too kind, Mr. President. So the elections are fast approaching. How are you feeling about your chances? We'll see. Uncertainty doesn't suit you, Mr. President. I'm afraid I have an announcement to make to you. Why? What's wrong? After the term is done, I will be retiring. David, I can't accept this. You're irreplaceable in my cabinet. I've been in this line of work for many decades now. I swore an oath to myself years ago. I would quit if I ever felt like I didn't have the physical capability to serve anymore. At that point, I would become a hindrance. The time has come, Mr. President. My bones are aching, my hands are shaking, my voice is failing. Besides, I'm sure you can find a younger minister who's a little more full of life. You've been a mentor, a teacher, and a friend. Thank you for your service to this country. It was an honor, Mr. President. Best of luck, Anton. Thank you. Well, great. One of my most trusted advisors, who's never really steered me wrong, is retiring. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this episode. We sort of went to our own United Nations, dealt with our own version of the Cuban Missile Crisis. We'll see how that plays out. Hopefully, also, our alliance with the ATO or NATO will result in Rumberg not daring to go to war with us. We'll see how things played out. It was a lot of interesting diplomatic discussion and propaganda back and forth both ways. I guess we won't really know the full effect of all of this until our next episode when we wrap the series up and see how our presidency unfolds. Do we get reelected? Do we not? Do we stand up to the challenge from inside our own party? Do we not? We'll find that all out in the next episode, the final episode of our playthrough of Suzerain. Until then, this is the Historical Gamers. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'm out.